It was past midnight when the phone rang. Marcus Hale didn't usually answer unknown numbers. He had people for that. Assistants, gatekeepers, a whole architecture of insulation built specifically so that the outside world couldn't reach him without permission. But something about that night was different. The rain was hitting the penthouse glass at an angle that felt almost personal. The city below him, 43 floors of Manhattan between him and the sidewalk, looked small and blurred, like a memory fading at the edges. And when the phone rang a second time, his hand moved before his mind did. He answered. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. He would remember that later. 3 seconds of nothing, and then a voice, low, measured, unhurried, said 4 words that stopped him cold. "You don't recognize me." It wasn't a question. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. His jaw tightened. Something in the cadence of that voice, something in the shape of those 4 words, pulled at a thread buried so deep inside him, he'd almost convinced himself it didn't exist anymore. "Who is this?" he said. Another silence, longer this time, and then the voice said a name he hadn't spoken in 40 years, a name he had trained himself to bury so efficiently that some mornings he genuinely couldn't remember if the whole thing had been real or just a dream he'd had once as a younger man in a smaller life, before everything else took over. His hand tightened around the phone. His face, the face that had graced the covers of Forbes, Fortune, and Time magazine, did something it almost never did anymore. It cracked. Welcome to True Spark Stories. Before we go any further, if you've never been here before, hit that subscribe button right now, turn on the notification bell, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We tell stories that stay with you. Stories about legacy, regret, choices, and the moments nobody puts in the press release. Stay with us. This one is going to matter. Now, let's go back, way back. Because to understand what that phone call meant, you need to understand who Marcus Hale was before he became Marcus Hale. In 1974, he was just a 22-year-old kid from Dayton, Ohio, with $30 in his wallet, a cardboard suitcase, and a mind that worked faster than anyone around him knew what to do with. He was the son of a factory worker and a seamstress. He had never been on a plane. He had never eaten at a restaurant that had more than 1 fork on the table. But he had a vision, sharp, consuming, almost frightening in its clarity, and he had made one promise to the one person in the world who believed in him. Her name was Ruth Calloway, 20 years old, dark eyes, a laugh that could fill a room and make strangers feel like old friends. She had met Marcus at a church picnic 3 summers before, and by the second summer, there was an understanding between them, unspoken at first, then spoken quietly, then spoken the way things get spoken when they're finally real. "Just give me 5 years," Marcus told her the night before he left. They were sitting on the porch steps of her mother's house. The cicadas were loud. The air smelled like cut grass in summer.
5 years, Ruth. I'll build something real, and then I'll come back, and we'll do this the right way.
She looked at him for a long time, not with doubt, with something more complicated than doubt. 5 years, she said, and she meant it, and he meant it. And then life happened the way life does. Not all at once, but in small daily increments that are easy to rationalize and nearly impossible to reverse. The first year he wrote letters, real ones, on paper, with stamps. Ruth wrote back. Long letters, full of detail, her mother's garden, the new teacher at the elementary school, the way the light fell on the street at 4 in the afternoon in October. Marcus read them late at night in his cramped Chicago apartment, and felt something warm in his chest that he told himself was motivation. The second year the letters got shorter. He was busier. His first business, a small logistics consultancy working out of a shared office space, was gaining traction in ways that demanded everything he had. He still called, Sundays usually, sometimes Saturdays. By the 3rd year he called on the 1st of the month, then every 6 weeks, then when he remembered. By the 4th year, there was a deal on the table that would change everything. A partnership that required relocation, total commitment, 70-hour weeks for 18 months straight, He wrote Ruth one letter that year. He never mailed it. By the 5th year, the year he was supposed to go back, there was no going back. There was only forward. There was only the next deal, the next expansion, the next threshold to cross before the one after that. Ruth Calloway stopped calling first. He told himself that meant she understood, that she had moved on, that it was better this way. He was good at telling himself things. He married 3 times over the next 30 years. The first was brief and ended without drama. The second lasted a decade and produced 2 children he spoke to formally at holidays. The third ended in a very expensive silence. By 65, Marcus Hale was one of the 20 wealthiest men in the United States, the founder of a real estate and development empire that stretched across 11 cities, and the loneliest person he knew. He didn't think about Ruth often. He had built very effective walls around that particular room. But sometimes, late at night, in large empty penthouses, when the rain hit the glass at a certain angle, the walls got thinner, and that was the night the phone rang. "You don't recognize me," the voice had said, low, calm, carrying something underneath it that Marcus couldn't immediately name. "I'm going to ask you again," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Who is this?" "My name is Daniel," the voice said, "and I'm not calling for money." A pause. "I'm calling because you need to know the truth." Marcus sat down slowly. The city glittered 43 floors below him. Somewhere in the building an air conditioning unit hummed. He was aware, suddenly, of how quiet everything was. "What truth?" he said. "The kind," Daniel said quietly, "that doesn't go away just because you stop looking for it." Marcus spent the next 60 seconds saying nothing. This was unusual for him. In 40 years of business, silence was a weapon he deployed strategically, a negotiating tool, a power move, a way of letting the other person fill the room with things they hadn't intended to say. But this silence was different. This silence was happening to him, not because of him. He was sitting inside it the way a man sits inside a car that has just stopped moving after hitting something, when the body hasn't fully registered what the mind already knows. "How did you get this number?" he finally said. "It wasn't easy," Daniel said. "It took about 2 years. 2 years." Marcus repeated the words slowly, testing them. "I wasn't in a hurry. I wanted to be sure before I made this call. I wanted to know what I was going to say." "And do you?" Marcus said. "Know what you're going to say?" "I do now," Daniel said. "I've rehearsed this conversation in my head probably 300 times, and every single time I started the same way." A pause. "I would ask you if you remember a woman named Ruth Calloway." The name hit Marcus somewhere between the sternum and the throat. He had heard his own name announced at award ceremonies with less impact than those 2 words. "Ruth Calloway," said plainly, without accusation, without theater. Just said. Like a fact. Like a stone placed on a table between 2 people. "I remember her," Marcus said, and his voice, for the first time all night, was completely quiet. "I know you do," Daniel said. "Because she remembered you too. She talked about you. Not often. She wasn't the kind of person who lived looking backward. But sometimes, when she thought I was asleep, I'd hear her. A beat. She didn't sound angry when she talked about you. That's the part that always got me." Marcus closed his eyes. "Who are you, Daniel?" The silence that followed was the longest of the night, and in it Marcus already knew. Some part of him, the part that had driven away from Dayton in 1974 with $30 and a promise, already knew. Had perhaps always known, the way people know things they've decided not to know. "I'm 41 years old," Daniel said. "I grew up in Dayton. I work in municipal housing advocacy. I have 2 daughters, and until about 3 years ago, I had a mother who raised me alone and told me my father had left before I was born, and that she'd never told him because she didn't want to be the reason his dream died. The rain against the glass, the hum of the air conditioning, the city glittering and indifferent. She protected your dream," Daniel said, "at the cost of her own. If you are still watching up to this point, and I believe you are, type 'I'm still here' in the comment section right now, and tell us what you're feeling. Because this story is about to go somewhere that most of us are not prepared for. Stay with us." Marcus Hale, The man who had negotiated the acquisition of 17 companies, who had looked bankruptcy in the eye twice and laughed, who had testified before a Senate subcommittee without notes and without nerves, stood up from his chair and walked to the window and pressed his forehead against the cold glass and said nothing for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was unrecognizable to him. "She never told me." "No," Daniel said. "She was when I left, was she?" "She found out 6 weeks after you left," Daniel said. "She wrote you one letter. She never sent it. I found it in her things after she passed." Marcus closed his eyes. "When did she—" "4 years ago," Daniel said. "Pancreatic cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to—" He stopped, started again. "She went fast. That was a mercy, I think." The word mercy sat in Marcus's chest like something heavy placed on a shelf that wasn't built to hold it. "I have to ask you something," Marcus said, and for the first time all night, he wasn't controlling the conversation. He wasn't managing it, shaping it, steering it toward an exit. He was just in it, raw and undefended. Why now? Why call me now? After? Why not before she passed? Why not? "Because she made me promise," Daniel said simply. "She made me promise not to contact you while she was alive. She said she didn't want her last chapter to be about reopening yours. She said—" His voice tightened slightly, then settled. "She said some people are meant to be a season, not a lifetime, and that what mattered was what you did with the time you were given." Marcus laughed. It came out wrong, too short, almost a gasp. "That sounds like her." "Yes," Daniel said. "It does." There was a strange quality to the silence that followed. Not comfortable. Nothing about this conversation was comfortable, but not hostile either. Two strangers on either end of a phone line, connected by a woman who had loved one of them completely and protected the other one from a distance for 4 decades, finding the shape of something that had no name yet. "I need you to understand something," Marcus said finally. "I need you to know—" He stopped, started again. "I left because I was selfish, not because I didn't care. I was 22 years old and I was hungry in a way that I didn't know how to explain to anyone, including myself. And I told myself that she understood, that she'd move on, that I was doing the right thing by not dragging her into a life that wasn't built yet." He paused. "I was wrong about all of it. I've known that for a long time. I just didn't know how wrong." "I know," Daniel said. "Do you?" Marcus asked. Not defensively, genuinely. "She told me," Daniel said. "She said you weren't a bad man. She said you were a man who made a choice, and that choices have consequences, and that the hardest part of being human is living inside the consequences of the things you thought were temporary." The next morning, Marcus Hale did not go to his office. He told his assistant to clear his schedule. He took a car, not the usual black SUV but a regular taxi, to a storage facility in Queens where he kept documents from the early years of his company. Things he had never thrown away but had never looked at either. He worked through box after box until he found a photograph. Small, slightly faded at the edges. 2 young people at a church picnic in 1971. One of them was him, though he almost didn't recognize the person. Young and unguarded in a way he hadn't been in decades. The other was Ruth. She was laughing. He sat on the floor of that storage unit for 40 minutes. Then he called his lawyer. Then he called his assistant. Then he made a reservation at a small cafe in Midtown for the following Thursday. 2 people, no press, no staff, and he sent the address to a number in Dayton, Ohio, with a message that said only if you're willing, no pressure, no expectations. The cafe was called Henrietta's. It had 11 tables, a chalkboard menu, and a server named Pat who had worked there for 22 years and who had seen enough of life across those 11 tables to know when she should be invisible. She was invisible that Thursday. Marcus arrived first. He was wearing a gray wool coat and no tie, which for him was the equivalent of showing up in pajamas. He ordered coffee. Then he changed the order to tea. Then he sat with his hands flat on the table and waited. The door opened at exactly 12:15. The man who walked in was 41 years old and wore a worn canvas jacket and moved through the room with a quiet, unhurried confidence that Marcus recognized before he recognized anything else. because it was the same quality that had once gotten a 22-year-old from Dayton into rooms he had no business being in. Same posture, same hands, same still quality in the eyes. Daniel saw him, stopped for a moment, then crossed the room and sat down. They looked at each other. No dramatic music, no orchestrated moment. Just two men at a table in a cafe on a Thursday afternoon in November, breathing the same air for the first time, figuring out how to exist in the same sentence. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said. "Thank you for the invitation," Daniel said. Pat came and poured tea. Neither of them spoke until she left. "I've been trying to figure out what I wanted to say to you," Marcus said. "I've been drafting this conversation in my head the same way you said you drafted yours, and I keep arriving at the same place." He paused. "I don't have a defense. I don't have an explanation that holds up. All I have is the truth, which is that I left, and I kept leaving, and I built something that cost more than I understood I was spending." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "She didn't raise me to be angry," he said. "I want you to know that. She was one of those people who somehow managed to carry difficult things without becoming defined by them. She worked at the school district for 28 years. She volunteered at the food bank every Saturday. She coached my daughter's youth soccer team when she was 62 years old." He smiled, brief and real. "She was annoying, honestly, in the way really good people are annoying. You couldn't be too bitter around her. It didn't take—" Marcus exhaled something that was almost a laugh. "What was she like, at the end?" "Sharp," Daniel said immediately. "Until the last few weeks, she was sharper than anyone in the room. She finished a crossword puzzle the morning of the day she—" He stopped. "She liked true crime podcasts, which surprised everyone. She thought your second marriage was a mistake based entirely on one interview she saw on television. She said the woman looked like she was performing being in love." "She wasn't wrong," Marcus said. "She usually wasn't." The conversation moved the way conversations move when two people are circling something important and haven't quite reached the center yet. They talked about Daniel's daughters, 8 and 11, one who loved science, one who loved theater. They talked about Marcus's children from his second marriage, distant, civil, strangers who shared his last name. They talked about Dayton, about what had changed and what hadn't, about the factory where Marcus's father had worked for 31 years before it closed. And then Daniel said quietly, without any preamble, "I don't want anything from you. I need you to really hear that. I'm not here to be written into a will or be featured in a press release. I'm 41 years old. I have a life, a real one, built by myself and my mother and the people who showed up for us." "I hear you," Marcus said. "I called you," Daniel continued, "because when she died, I found that letter. The one she wrote to you in 1974 and never sent. And I read it, and I thought, this man has been living inside an incomplete story for 40 years. And whatever he's built, whatever he's become, he deserves to know the ending." He looked at Marcus directly. "She didn't hate you. She wasn't waiting for an apology. She had made her peace with it long before I was old enough to ask questions." Marcus was quiet for a long time. Outside, the city moved at its usual indifferent pace. Taxis, pedestrians, the ordinary machinery of a million lives running simultaneously. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "Yes." "The letter. What did it say?" Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his canvas jacket and placed a folded envelope on the table between them. It was old. The paper had gone soft at the creases. The handwriting on the front was faded but legible, one word, a name, Marcus. He looked at it for a long time without touching it. "She wanted you to have it," Daniel said. "Eventually, when the time was right. She trusted me to know when that was." Marcus picked up the envelope, held it carefully the way you hold something irreplaceable. He didn't open it. Not there, not then. That was a private thing. A between him and Ruth thing, 40 years late, entirely necessary. "I want to do something," Marcus said after a moment. "Not for you. You've made it clear you don't need anything from me, and I respect that completely. But for her." He looked up. "I want to create a foundation in her name. Not a grand announcement, not a press event. Something real and operational, focused on single-parent families and housing insecurity. In Dayton, he paused. Because I know, from something that happened recently that I probably shouldn't get into right now, what it costs when the system fails people who are already carrying too much. Daniel looked at him steadily. She would have rolled her eyes at the name on a building part. There won't be a name on a building, Marcus said. Just the work. A pause. And then Daniel did something Marcus hadn't expected. He smiled, fully, the kind of smile that comes from somewhere genuine and doesn't need anything in return. She would have liked that, he said. They stayed at that table for 2 hours. When they finally left, they stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the thin November light. I don't know what this is, Marcus said honestly. I don't know what category it fits into. I'm not going to pretend I know how to be a father at 65, or that I deserve the opportunity to try. But, he stopped, if you're ever willing, coffee, a phone call, whatever the right speed is, I'm not going anywhere. Daniel nodded slowly. I'll think about it, he said. That's honest. That's enough, Marcus said. They shook hands. And then Daniel walked south and Marcus walked north, and the city absorbed them both, as cities do, without ceremony. But something had changed. In Marcus Hale's chest, in the part of him that had been sealed shut for 40 years, something had quietly, irreversibly opened. Not healed. That would be too simple, too clean, too dishonest a word for it. But opened. Like a window in a room that had been airless for too long. He didn't go back to the office that afternoon. He went home, sat in the quiet of his penthouse, and opened Ruth's letter. We won't tell you what it said. Some things belong only to the people they were written for. But we'll tell you this. When Marcus Hale set the letter down, 45 minutes later, he sat very still for a long time. And then he picked up his phone. Not to make a deal or close an acquisition or instruct anyone to do anything, but to call his son, his actual, legal, documented son from his second marriage, and say something he hadn't said in 11 years. I'd like to have dinner, just us, no occasion. I'd like to see you. Success is loud, regret is quiet. And sometimes the most important call of your life comes after you've already convinced yourself that the story is finished. It isn't finished. It's never finished. Not until it is. If this story moved you in any way, hit the like button, leave a comment, tell us what you would have done in Marcus's position. Tell us whether you think what Daniel did took courage or something else entirely. Tell us what Ruth's silence cost and what it meant. And subscribe to True Spark Stories, because we have more of these. Stories about the phone calls that change everything. The choices that echo. The people who never made the front page but shaped the lives of people who did. See you next time.